Hey everyone, let's talk about U.S. elections. Not the headlines or the noise, but the system underneath it all. What has already happened to it, what's unfolding right now, and what it's going to take to save the integrity of our elections while we still can. Once you understand the pattern, not the chaos, but the pattern, the whole picture becomes clearer. And that's where I want to begin. We've lived through the test run in 2020, and the same playbook is being used again, but now by people who've learned from their mistakes and understand the system even better. So let's start with what happened. In 2020, a sitting president lost an election and then tried to stay in power, not with one scheme, but with several overlapping efforts, all happening at the same time. Before a single vote was cast, Trump told millions of people the only way he could lose was if the election was stolen. He attacked mail-in voting in the middle of a pandemic, and his postmaster general slowed the mail so dramatically that a federal judge called it a politically motivated attack on voting. And when Trump lost the election, the pressure campaign began. He called Georgia and asked them to find 11,780 votes, one more vote than he needed to win the state. He leaned on Arizona officials to toss out ballots. He blasted out lies accusing election workers of crimes. Ruby Freeman was one of those workers in Georgia, hired to help count ballots. She was just doing her job, and for whatever reason, Trump and his allies zeroed in on her, accused her of every crime imaginable, and unleashed a tidal wave of threats that forced her out of her home. And she was only one of thousands who left election work after 2020 because of fear, harassment, and danger. After losing several key swing states, Trump's team pushed a strategy we hadn't seen in modern American politics. They gathered a group of Republican activists, the people who would have been electors if Trump had actually won their states, and had them sign official-looking documents claiming Trump had won. These papers were made to look legitimate, and they were sent to Congress and the National Archives as if they carried real authority. It wasn't about fraud. It was about manufacturing chaos to delay or overturn the results of the election. And then came the final push, pressure on Mike Pence and Congress to block certification. That pressure ended with something we have to stop downplaying. On January 6, 2021, a violent mob stormed the U.S. Capitol to stop the peaceful transfer of power. This wasn't a protest, it wasn't a rally, it was an attack, planned in advance and given Trump's seal of approval. People smashed windows, beat police officers, built a noose outside our Capitol building, and stormed through the halls screaming for lawmakers they wanted to hurt. An officer died. Several died by suicide in the aftermath, and many more are living with lasting trauma. The only reason 2020 didn't end in a full constitutional break is because enough people said no. Dozens of judges said no to Trump's bogus lawsuits because there was no evidence of fraud. Local election boards said no, even when it meant mobs outside their homes. Even Mike Pence, who bent over backward to justify doing what Trump wanted, finally accepted the truth. What he was being asked to do was unconstitutional, and he said no. No functioning democracy on earth would ever let a man who helped cause an insurrection against his own country run for office again. The fact that Trump isn't in jail right now and was allowed to run in 2024 shows us all how weak some of our guardrails have become. And that brings us to where we are now. After 2020, the strategy changed. Instead of trying to flip the result after Election Day, the focus shifted to changing the rules before the next election even happens. In Georgia, lawmakers didn't just limit absentee voting and cut back drop boxes. They made it illegal to hand someone a bottle of water while they stand in a 3-hour line waiting to vote. Think about how absurd and cruel that is. But even worse, the Georgia state legislature now has more control over the state election board and the power to take over county boards in places like Fulton County, which is heavily black and heavily Democratic. In plain English, if Atlanta votes the wrong way, the state now has tools to take over the local election office. Meanwhile, as I pointed out earlier, threats drove out thousands of experienced election workers, and in their place, are many people who still claim the 2020 election was stolen. People who believe the lie are now running the exact offices that handle polling locations, ballot counting, and certification. Upon Trump's return to the White House, he issued an executive order on election integrity that would give federal agencies new ways to purge voter rolls in the name of fighting fraud. He tried to require citizenship paperwork to register to vote, which was blocked by a judge, but he's already trying again. He promised to eliminate mail-in voting entirely, and he's moved to get more control over the Postal Service, the infrastructure millions rely on to vote. So when people ask, what does a modern stolen election look like? It's not boxes of fake ballots or hackers in a basement. Elections are still happening, but fewer people will be allowed to participate. It's long lines in certain neighborhoods, and nobody allowed to hand out water. It's mail ballots tossed out over tiny technicalities. It's aggressive voter purges that hit certain communities the hardest. It's county boards refusing to certify results. It's state officials claiming they don't trust the totals in a close race. It's competing slates of electors in a swing state. And it's Congress being asked to choose which votes count. Now, from the outside, everything still looks normal. Same stickers, same rituals, same language, but underneath, the system has been rigged before you even walk into the polling place. Now, this is where I expect people to start panicking, but don't, okay? Let's slow down and talk about what we can actually do, because none of this is baked in. These are choices politicians make, and the public can force them to make different ones. We're not bystanders in this. We still have influence over what happens next. States can pass simple laws that say when the votes are counted and verified, you can't stall, you can't refuse, you can't play games. You certify the results. And if you refuse to do your job without a real reason, you face consequences, like fines, or, my preference, a little jail time. States can also require that if someone wants to challenge an election, they take it to court quickly. No endless audits or political fishing expeditions after the fact. Courts decide based on evidence, period. Congress could set basic rules so your right to vote doesn't depend on your zip code. These laws already exist on paper, they just haven't passed yet. So push them to pass them. And then there are watchdog groups, lawyers, journalists, civic groups that are still out there tracking every attempt to weaken the system. They're sounding alarms early, they're filing lawsuits, they're explaining the changes in plain English. They can't fix everything, but they can make sure the bad actors don't get away with it quietly. But the most important guardrail is still the people. That's what saved us in 2020. It wasn't one law. It was a lot of individuals in key positions refusing to cross a line, even when it cost them personally. Democracy doesn't collapse because people don't care. It collapses because people get overwhelmed and tune it out. And that's the one thing we can't afford. So pay attention to what's happening in your own state. Know who runs your elections. Support the people who tell the truth, even when it costs them. Contact your state legislators and your members of Congress. Tell them you want voting rights expanded, not restricted. And if you're able, volunteer. Poll workers are the front line of democracy. So let's do our part. If you find these breakdowns helpful and want me to keep doing them, my tip jar is linked in my bio. And if you can't give right now, share this video. That's just as powerful. We've seen exactly how this happens. We're not confused anymore. And because we understand the pattern, we have the power to break it.